Hi, Aqua Roomers. Time for chapter reading. Oh, yesterday. Do you remember? Cousin Charlie jumping up and down on the bee's nest, getting stung everywhere. And he had been a naughty boy. He was supposed to go into the woods to help Pa and Uncle Henry, and he just made trouble. So he was sent back home. Ma and Aunt Polly made mud packs and covered him in mud and then wrapped him in a sheet. And of course he had a fever, was so swollen from all the bee stings, he had to stay in bed. And that was a long, hard day of work for Pa. So they're on their way home in the wagon. Pa was very tired. His hands ached, so he could not drive very well. But the horses knew the way home. Ma sat beside him with baby Carrie, and Laura and Mary sat on the board behind them. Then they heard Pa tell about what Charlie had done. Laura and Mary were horrified. They were often naughty themselves, but they never imagined anyone could be as naughty as Charlie had been. He hadn't worked to help save the oats. He hadn't minded his father when his father spoke to him. He had bothered Pa and Uncle Henry when they were hard at work. Then Pa told about the yellow jacket's nest and said, "Serves him right." After she was in the trundle bed that night, Laura lay and listened to the rain drumming on the roof and streaming from the eaves, and she thought about what Pa had said. She thought about what the yellow jackets had done to Charlie. She thought it served Charlie right too, because he had been so monstrously naughty, and the bees had a right to sting him when he jumped on their home. But she didn't understand why Pa called him a little liar. She didn't understand how Charlie could be that way. Ooh. The Wonderful Machine. Look at that. It looks to me like the oats are going in here and, oh, look, pouring out there. Let's read. The next day, Pa cut the heads from several bundles of oats and brought the clean, bright yellow straws to Ma. She put them in a tub of water to soften them and keep them soft. Then she sat in the chair by the side of the tub and braided the straws. Do you know how to braid? If you have 3 pieces of yarn, 3 pieces of hair, it has to be a little bit soft. And then you just keep crossover, crossover, crossover. So Ma is doing it with straw. She took up several of them, knotted their ends together, and began to braid. The straws were different lengths, and when she came near the end of one straw, she put a new long one from the tub in its place and went on braiding. She let the end of the braid fall back into the water and kept on braiding until she had many yards of braid. All her spare time, for days, she was braiding straws. She made a fine, narrow, smooth braid using 7 of the smallest straws. She used 9 larger straws for a wider braid and made it notched all along the edges. And from the very largest straws, she made the widest braid of all. When all the straws were braided, she threaded a needle with strong white thread, and beginning at the end of a braid, she sewed it round and round, holding the braid so it would lie flat after it was sewn. This made a little mat. and Ma said it was the top of the crown of a hat. Then she held the braid tighter on one edge and kept on sewing it around and around. The braid drew in and made the sides of the crown. When the crown was high enough, Ma held the braid loosely again as she kept on sewing around, and the braid lay flat and was near the hat brim. When the brim was wide enough, Ma cut the braid and sewed the end fast so that it could not unbraid itself. Ma sewed hats for Laura and Mary of the finest, narrowest braid. For Pa and for herself, she made hats of the wider, notched braid. That was Pa's Sunday hat. Ma set it on a board to dry, shading it nicely as she did so, and when it dried, it stayed in the shape that she gave it. See? If you look closely, oh, you can tell that she braided those. My goodness. I wonder, that must be fun to do. Be a lot of work, but it looks like fun to me. Ma could make beautiful hats. Laura liked to watch her, and she learned how to braid the straw. She made a little hat for Charlotte. The days were growing shorter, and the nights were cooler. One night, Jack Frost passed by, and in the morning, there were bright colors here and there among the green leaves of the big woods. Then all the leaves stopped being green. They were yellow and scarlet and crimson and golden and brown. Along the rail fence, the sumac held up its dark red cones of berries above bright flame-colored leaves. Acorns were falling from the oaks, and Laura and Mary made little acorn cups and saucers for the playhouses. Walnuts and hickory nuts were dropping to the ground. Squirrels were scampering busily everywhere in the big woods, gathering their winter store of nuts and hiding them away in hollow trees. Laura and Mary went with Ma to gather walnuts and hickory nuts and hazelnuts. They spread them in the sun to dry. Then they beat off the dried outer hulls and stored the nuts in the attic for the winter. A walnut is the same color green as a tennis ball, but it's smaller. It's bigger than a golf ball, smaller than a tennis ball. And that's not the part that you see when you buy a walnut. That is the outer hull that has to come off, and it is hard to get it off. I think that's why it had to be beaten. It was fun to gather the large round walnuts and the smaller hickory nuts and the little hazelnuts that grew in bunches on the bushes. The soft outer hulls of the walnuts were full of a brown juice that stained their hands, but the hazelnut hull smelled good and tasted good too when Laura used her teeth to pry a nut loose. Everyone was busy now, for the garden vegetables must be stored away. Laura and Mary helped, picking up dusty potatoes after Pa had dug them from the ground, and pulling the long yellow carrots and the round purple-topped turnips, and they helped Ma cook the pumpkin for pumpkin pies. With the butcher knife, Ma cut the big orange-colored pumpkins into halves. She cleaned the seeds out of the center and cut the pumpkin into long slices from which she pared off the rind. Laura helped her cut the slices into cubes. Ma put the cubes into the big iron pot on the stove, poured in some water, and then watched while the pumpkin slowly boiled down all day long. All the water and the juice must be boiled away, and the pumpkin must never burn. The pumpkin was a thick, dark, good-smelling mass in the kettle. It did not boil like water, but bubbles came up in it and suddenly exploded, leaving holes that closed quickly. Every time a bubble exploded, the rich hot pumpkin smell came out. Laura stood on a chair and watched the pumpkin for Ma and stirred it with a wooden paddle. She held the paddle in both hands, stirred carefully, because if the pumpkin burned, there wouldn't be any pumpkin pies. For dinner, they ate the stewed pumpkin with their bread. Stewed pumpkin and bread for dinner. They made it into pretty shapes on their plates. It was a beautiful color. And they smoothed and molded it so prettily with their knives. Ma never allowed them to play with their food at the table. They must always eat nicely everything that was set before them, leaving nothing on their plates. But she did not let them make the rich brown. But she did let them make the rich brown stewed pumpkin into pretty shapes before they ate it. At other times, they had baked Hubbard squash for dinner. The rind was so hard, Ma had to take Pa's axe to cut the squash into pieces. Wow. When the pieces were baked in the oven, Laura loved to spread the soft insides with butter, and then scoop the yellow flesh from the rind and eat it. For supper now, they often had hulled corn and milk. That was good too. It was so good that Laura could hardly wait for the corn to be ready after Ma started to hull it. It took 2 or 3 days to make hulled corn. The first day, Ma cleaned and brushed all the ashes out of the cook stove. Then she burned some clean, bright hardwood and saved its ashes. She put the hardwood ashes in a little cloth bag. That night, Pa brought in some ears of corn with large plump kernels. He nubbed the ears, shelling off the small kernels at their tips. Then he shelled the rest into a large pan until the pan was full. Early the next day, Ma put the shelled corn and the bag of ashes into the big iron kettle. She filled the kettle with water and kept it boiling a long time. At last, the kernels of corn began to swell, and they swelled and they swelled till their skins split open and began to peel off. When every skin was loose and peeling, Ma lugged the heavy kettle outdoors. So did you know, if you look at a piece of corn, it really is covered with a thin layer, which is like a skin. So Ma had to get all of those skins off of every kernel of corn. She dipped the corn out of the kettle into the tub. Then she rolled the sleeves of her flowered dress above her elbows. She knelt by the tubs, and with her hands, she rubbed and scrubbed the corn until the hulls came off and floated on top of the water. So she is washing and scrubbing every ear of corn to get all of the pieces and the hulls off. My goodness. For supper, that part, yes. Often she poured the water off, filled the tub again with buckets of water from the spring. She kept on rubbing and scrubbing the corn between her hands, changing the water until every hull came off and was washed away. And tomorrow, we still have more to read. My goodness. But look, we're almost to the end of the book. That makes me sad. But there's still good stuff to go. All right? Until tomorrow, bye, Aqua Roomers.